All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Opposite of Cheating podcast. I am thrilled to have with me today Chris Ostro. You may have heard of him. He just did a Pangram webinar. He's been featured. Wasn't it Hard Fork, Chris, that I messaged you about that you were on that one time?
On
Uh,
what?
they, Hard Fork. Remember they threw out your
Oh,
name? Wasn't it
yep,
Hard Fork?
yep.
So he's even been mentioned on New York Times Hard Fork podcast, if any of you are listeners.
I
He's
think
also been on Teaching in Higher Education as well in that podcast. So welcome, Chris. Excited to talk to you.
hey
Uh,
there.
we are going to start the same way we start with everyone, which is tell us a little bit more about what you do and in what context.
Hey there. My name is Chris Ostro, and I'm an assistant teaching professor and learning slash AI strategist, new title, over at the University of Colorado Boulder in the Division of Continuing Education. And over there, I have sort of this weird role that I've made for myself, right? I worked my way up through adjuncting, switched over to continuing ed, and then started working with the course design team, trying to help them make some of the trainings a little more faculty oriented, right? How can we deliver this information in a way faculty are most excited to hear or what's most practically useful, or, whatever.
Yeah.
And then, that kind of put me in a good position when the pandemic hit. I was kind of in a great spot to be practically really helpful in a real way. Here are crises happening in the classroom. Here are things we need to come up with at least a band-aid for right now. And then shortly thereafter, the slow return to campus. And I remember in 2023 when the first time I started seeing some Gen AI work in my classroom. It was great to have someone like this on the team where I could suddenly, start ringing the bell like this is a thing we're gonna have to figure out. So yeah, it's a lot of the work I do. And now I work with the learning design group over at CU Boulder 50%, along with my
Okay.
50% teaching. And I design their course design series trainings as well as, I'm in charge of a lot of these inter-office collaborations. A lot of these bigger universities like CU have silos of brilliant experts
Yeah.
who rarely interact. And I've become the annoying guy who just shows up in their office like, hey, you want to talk about AI? So
Nice.
that's a lot of my job now.
Yeah, I hear you. AI has definitely given my job a new life and a new dimension than what I had before. So, in that sense, I love it.
Well, and I also think this is a moment where a lot of collaboration is really helpful, right? Like being a jack of all trades, so to speak, and being someone who can actually just lean into these offices and start some conversations usually is annoying. And in a lot of contexts, it still is, I've found. But in these moments, it's actually really helpful too.
Yes, exactly. I am repeatedly told by faculty on this campus that they're so thankful for those of us who are leaning into it, that we're here to help.
I wanted to pause really quick. Sorry, I actually was not on the other podcast. I was on Uncanny Valley, and
Uncanny Valley. I
I
knew
just
it was.
I wanted to throw that out because I don't know if it matters if we correct that, but
I
I
think
also
it matters,
probably
and
does.
regardless, very an excellent. So that's Wired's a
Yep.
podcast. For those of you who don't know, Uncanny Valley, I'll put it in the show notes. And excellent podcast that I listen to
Oh,
every
I was
episode.
I was shocked to hear my name in it. I that was a very weird moment. That and also after one of the AI detection literature reviews, I had someone who showed up to my next talk and said they were quote a fan, and that was a moment that I hated that. Like that was a weird feeling.
Yeah, I remember I think it was my first book. I had a grad student in an elevator with me and they had a copy of my book and they did the fanboy thing and asked me to sign it and I was so like this is silly. It's just me, you know.
If someone ever asks me to sign something, it'll go to my head in a way that is irreparable. That will never be resolved.
Oh, I don't know. I think it's pretty easy to stay humble if you just remember you're human like everybody else. Um, okay, so speaking of students being human, a rough transition there, but
Huh.
this is a question I ask everybody. What is your first memory of encountering this idea, this concept of academic integrity?
So does this count moments where I cheated?
Sure.
Yeah,
If
because
if
like
it led you to think, understand academic integrity.
it led me so in the moment I did not give this any deep thought, but
Yeah.
older Chris has reflected on this a lot.
Mm,
So when I was 14, I was in high school. This would be like ninth grade, somewhere 2001. I was
yeah.
in a computer science intro, comp sci 101. And back then, comp sci classes were typing classes and learning how to do the bells and whistles of Word. I went to a relatively, suburb of Detroit, not a really affluent school. So, the computer science class was largely, can you type and do you know how to like do word formatting and stuff?
Right.
Um, but hey, that was cutting edge in 2001. And I didn't have a computer at home. I grew up in a pretty poor
Mm.
family. I had no access
Yep.
to a computer. And I was consistently just falling behind in all of these, tests and stuff where, I remember one of the final exams, this is where I cheated. One of the final exams or some type of exam, I had to get above 80 words per minute with a certain number of errors.
Yep.
And I just couldn't do it because I literally
Couldn't practice.
I couldn't practice. I could
Yeah.
not study
Yep.
in a very literal way. And so I thought I was being so smooth. And the student sitting next to me was a girl, high school crush that I had. And I asked if she'd be willing to like, if I slide my keyboard over, I'll buy your homecoming ticket, huh? And
Ah,
I thought this was such a good way, like, and then we can go.
yeah.
And she did let me buy her ticket. She did not go to
Not
homecoming
go
with
with you.
me. But also, in that moment, I did not give it any deep thought. I was just like, well, it's impossible for me to pass this, and this is what I have to do.
Hmm.
And now that I'm older, I look back at it a lot as a discussion of like accessibility, but like economic accessibility almost, right? If
Yeah.
I if I literally had just had like the worst computer in all of America at home at that point, I still could have studied. But I
Yeah.
didn't. I just didn't have any ability to that. And it also, as I get older, I reflect a lot about how it was kind of a terrible assessment because now I'm older. And the fact is, I learned typing super quickly because I had to, right? Like as soon as I was thrown into college and I did
Yeah.
have my own PC, if I wanted to have a social life, I had to learn how to type pretty quickly. If I wanted to learn how to do my homework, if I, all of that stuff,
Yeah.
I learned very quickly because I
Yeah.
had to. I don't know. So that's kind of one of the first times that I personally cheated, and I reflect on it as like a learning
Yeah.
moment in a real way.
Yeah.
And then I guess for a more mature, less Chris centric story, you know, I probably think back to when I was teaching Latin. So I've taught a bunch of different settings in courses, right? I've taught Latin at the high school level as well at the university level. I've taught Greek. I have tutored Greek to students. I tutor a ton still. I've done test prep, ACT, SAT,
Mm.
GRE. I've been all over the place. When you're a grad student and you're poor, you just find ways to make ends meet.
Yeah.
And one of the things I remember that really stuck me. Actually, I thought of a better story here. One that really stuck with me was when I was teaching this SAT class, and this is a class. It was through an unnamed company, but I was being paid to lead a group of 8-ish students. And I find standardized tests fun. I don't know if they are good diagnostically necessarily, but I think they are fun.
Official nerd alert. Okay.
Yeah, well, I don't know, especially because for me at that point they have no consequence. I'm just like,
Right.
ooh, you want to try to
Right.
trick me with this
Ooh.
wording? I'm into
Yeah.
that. But I remember catching a student in that class cheating on the homework assignment. And by cheating, I mean like he had very clearly, like, the way we did it is it was a small enough class where we could kind of do a big lesson. I would give a lecture for like 20-ish minutes, 30-ish minutes on whatever concept. And then they would in pairs kind of work through some of the
Yeah.
homework together. And I would go around one-on-one, because there's like an odd number of students, if I remember correctly. I would work one-on-one with each of them and kind of talk through the homework from the last night.
Yeah.
And one of the students I was talking with, it just became clear that he had just went to the back of the book, copied all the, B, C, C, A, D, C. And when I was trying to talk through the questions, he couldn't do any of it. And this goes back to what you talked about the lack of like oral exams in the US. I don't think he was expecting to have to justify this. And
Right.
so as we're going through it, pretty quickly after like 3 questions becomes clear he had not even read the questions.
Yeah.
He was shocked there was a trick question on there. And so eventually, after a little bit of awkward silence, which I was happy to let linger a little because I don't know, I don't want to make students uncomfortable, but I think just like a milligram of discomfort there actually goes a long way in learning. And
Mhm.
then eventually I asked, like, why would you cheat on this? Right? Like, this is
Yeah.
ungraded. Your parents are
Right.
paying for you to be here. Right? This is ultimately only going to help
To help
you
you. Yeah.
do better on this test. Like,
Yeah.
either if you didn't do the homework because life got in the way, don't do it. Show up and say you
Right.
didn't have time. And at least then we could have a more honest, okay, well, how do we use this time productively sort of conversation?
Yeah.
And it was clear the student, he hadn't given it much thought. It was just rote habit. He was worried about getting in trouble. And
Yeah.
I think about that student, with some regularity because,
Huh.
that worried about getting in trouble for not taking seriously a thing that his parents have paid for. And
Yeah.
I think I see that student kind of often in a higher ed setting as well.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and so that ties actually with another episode that people might watch, the one with Jess Eiler, where we're talking about grades, right? He wrote How We're Failing Our Future and is critical of grades. So I asked them the big question of, oh, if we got rid of grades, there'd be no cheating, right? So your story is a perfect example of
There
no
would still be cheating.
grades and still cheating.
Also, can I give a non-academic, really quick example?
Yeah.
This is another Chris Center story. I'm sorry, I love these. But no, I had some breathing issue, and they were trying to fit me for a CPAP,
Yeah.
and I was trying. This is not medical at all, but like your modern CPAP machines are terrible. They snitch on you, first of all, right? They send
Yeah.
data. If you're not wearing it enough, your insurance doesn't cover it. And
Yeah.
so the first week that I wore it, I did not sleep at all. I could not fall asleep with this mask on. Spoilers, I never got able to.
Yeah.
I was literally like wearing it at night, staying awake through the night, and then napping throughout the day. And so eventually I got to this point where I was talking to a friend and he's like, you can just wear it during the day. It just sends the number of hours that you
Oh,
wore
not
it,
what time of
not
day.
what time. And so I was wearing it during the day to like pad my numbers. And I casually mentioned this to a different friend of mine who is a doctor. And he looked at me for a second and said, why would you do
Why?
that? They're just going to think this works. Right. Like they're just going to think
Yeah.
that this is actually a working thing and now you're paying for it and you're just paying money for a thing and still not sleeping. And I don't know. I was not young at this point, to be clear. I was like
Right.
34 probably.
Right.
But I think about that moment all the time that even I, as like a grizzled middle-aged professor, I'm still worried about letting people down, you know?
Yeah. And
And I
it's so
that
go
gets
ahead.
in real deep. And some students, that's a real driving force.
It is. And so when I've had conversations with students who are reported for violating academic integrity, oftentimes people always assume the students are going to be mad and indignant and all this stuff. And most of the time, they're just like, I'm so sorry. I let the professor down. I'm so sorry. I wasted your time. You've now had to spend time on this. And yes, they're cheating to avoid letting someone down, like the professor of getting a perfect product at the time they wanted it, and yet they're willing to let them down this way.
Well, I think there's the risk that there's the chance they think it won't get
They
caught.
won't get caught. Yeah,
Right? Yeah. I mean, and on some level, I get that a little bit. I mean, all of us have made that corner cut, right?
sure.
You do a job at work where you do it 80% as well as you could have, and you're just like, "Ah, my boss is not going to read through that. I will fix it
I've never
later."
done that,
Oh, okay. Well,
for the
then
record. Yeah.
you are superhuman, and I love that. Yeah, I've also never done that. If any one of my
Yeah,
colleagues are listening, but yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think it is an understandable thing, but it's also a force that we have to deal with in the classroom in a real way. And
absolutely.
I think it's yeah, I'm actually really grateful because when I was a student, you wouldn't believe it, but I was a real pain of a student. I was the sort of student who was difficult to deal with, high achieving, I think pretty clever, but
Yeah,
real pain in the ass.
yeah,
Constantly, I always wanted to know why we were doing something, and if I did not understand the why, I just wouldn't do it. Right? If I
hey,
thought it was arbitrary, I'm not interested.
yeah. No, I mean that is super important, right? We talk about that in the book about the intrinsic motivation. And I don't know if we put this in the book, but I say it a lot in my talks. Look, one of the first words we learn other than ma and da is why.
Yep.
Especially around 2, right? It's like,
Yeah.
"Don't touch the hot stove." Why? "Don't pick on your brother." Why? Don't and it's sad that we see that as annoying, when it's really a hallmark of human curiosity, right? And we should be embracing that and reinforcing that and encouraging that. And then, with another episode of ours with Susan Bloom, who wrote Schoolishness, she would say that school just kills the why. It makes students not only not want to ask that question, um, because it kind of doesn't matter. You just play the game.
Well, and it's interesting because on some level, I think one of the issues that higher ed faces in this moment, and kind of just generally, is a bit
Mhm.
of a sampling bias. The kind of people who go all the way to the end
Yeah,
of education and become leaders in university systems are generally students who loved the system or at least succeeded in it and
we're good at it. Yeah.
were try hard students in some way or another.
Yeah.
And I am grateful I wasn't because I think that my being a big pain in the ass who always wanted to know why means that on some level I karmically feel it is totally justified when I have those students, right? Like, and I'm prepared in my
Yeah.
classroom. There is not a single the first day when we go through my AI policy. It is not like it is a conversation, but it is also very clearly like, here are my rationales for every single decision I'm making here. And I want to talk about them with you. If you think that I am overselling or underselling this
Yeah.
thing, let's have
Yeah.
that conversation.
Yeah.
Because I'm a big believer, there is a power dynamic in the classroom. I think a lot I often work with faculty who work really hard to minimize that, who they really want students and to feel like this is like a really flat classroom. And I think there's something admirable about that to a degree.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when push
It's
comes to
not.
shove, you are the person you have a control that student does not.
Yeah.
And so I do try to like run my classroom democratically. But the other thing I really want my students to know is that when I do wield authority, it is not arbitrary. I am
Right.
not some random tyrant just throwing out random whims. I have a real
Real
rationale.
reason. Yeah.
And more than anything, I think that has helped me because
Yeah.
I'm not always going to get stuff right, but I'm never going to be looked at. I might get, in fact, I definitely have gotten stuff wrong, but I've always been looked at as like having put good faith effort in by my students.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that goes a long way. My students will put up with mistakes if they think you're actually caring. I found.
Right. And there's a reason why arbitrary and capricious is a bad thing in the legal world, right? It's one thing
Yeah.
to make a mistake based on solid thinking and foundation and policy and procedures, and it's another thing to proctor this student but not proctor this student. So that gets us to what you're kind of become known for, I think, is a voice, and what I say is the gray area, that's otherwise very small because people are polarized very much on this debate of to detect or not to detect, right?
Yeah.
So we've got this camp that says, I just want to trust students. I think detectors are horrible ways. They diminish trust, they kill trust, not diminish trust. They kill trust in the classroom. I just want to trust my students. And then you got folks on the other side that are like, they're not saying I don't want to trust students, but they're saying, look, I've got 400, 600 students. I'd love to trust them, but I can't. And
Yeah.
I need a tool to help me because why should this be on my shoulders alone? I need some assistance. I need some help. And I get both sides. I really do. And I'm like you, and I sit somewhere in the middle. And I want you but you're a teacher using detectors in your class. And so
Yep.
I want you to explain to folks how you use detectors, and do you think it is harming the trust or the relationship between you and your students? And if not, why not?
Sure. So also really quick question. When we're done, am I able to give you like a link we can put in the show notes? Because I have a Google
Absolutely.
Doc folder with all of my documentation and all that. That's
Perfect.
people, listeners might love.
They will love it.
I hope so. But I mean, that's a great question. And hey, like we talked about via email, I'm all about living in that gray area. I don't think there should be a binary here. Like I don't think there's an on-off switch.
No.
I for context, my classes, I think it matters what type of classrooms you're in.
Yeah.
I am in classes of anywhere from 18 to 22 students, maybe 16 to 22. Some online, some in person. I make a point of actually switching up the modality every semester. I have one online, one in person, one upper level, one lower level.
Okay.
I want to have. It's important for me as a course designer to have experience in literally all of those.
Right.
And what I have found is, generally speaking, AI detection is as corrosive to trust as you talk about it, right? My students, I think we are asserting values on our students that they often don't seem to have,
Yeah.
right? When I talk to them about privacy, like this is a tangent, but I swear I'll come back to the AI detection thing in a sec. But I had this conversation in a meeting about AI detection and its concerns for privacy.
Yeah.
And I brought this up to my students and they laughed. They thought it was the funniest thing in the world. They're like, one of my students said, and this was like a quote. He was like, my mom's ultrasound pictures are on Facebook. Why do you think I care about privacy? Right. This, and
Oh, my
also
words. Yeah.
especially over my students, especially this was a freshman level class. What I think the point the student tried to make was pretty valid though, that like this is practice, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm practicing these assignments. Oh, someone somewhere in Turnitin's deep dark database is my 300 words on why I think Patroclus is the most heroic in the Iliad. Cool, right?
Yeah.
Like, all right, I think that the discussion gets a lot grayer when you are, or even like less good when you're talking about work that someone might actually try to make a career out of. If I'm working with a graduate student, I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
Right. If I'm working with someone, a senior researcher, a senior undergraduate who's like maybe using this as a writing sample or something, that is at that point a professional piece as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And I 100% leave it to their discretion. But the way I try to bring up AI detection in the classroom is like, look, this is just a logical extension of the surveillance that the university has had since my time in the university. And if we don't like that, that takes some real restructuring of that whole system.
Yes.
Right, but Turnitin has like pre-AI, it was doing the same thing for plagiarism for 15, 20 years.
Yep.
And this is just a growth of that. If we are uncomfortable with that sort of security system and that way of securing assessments, we should really, really get down to brass tacks and rebuild a lot of things. But when it gets down to it, I think how I message it with students, like you talk about in your book, I'm not yelling policy at them. I'm talking about it with them, right? Hey,
Mm.
here is my policy. And again, if for listeners, feel free to go through the documents I give. I show you how I message it in the syllabus. I
Hmm.
show you how I message it on Canvas, although I couldn't include the video. There's like, if it's an asynchronous class, there's a 15 to 20-minute video of me talking through the policy one by one, going through my rationales, and then inviting students to reach out. If it's an in-person class, this is an
Yeah.
in-person talk, obviously. And then as part of that assignment, what they end up doing is they read a few of the articles I link, because that's the other thing. It's not just Chris's arbitrary policy. The policy is literally backboned by about 30
Right.
different academic articles. And then they read two or three of them, and then they do a class discussion on some of the nuance of AI. And then
Mm.
that leads us back to this negotiation of how do we feel about the policy.
Yeah.
I have at this point done this approach for about 3.5 semesters. I kind of figured it out in the middle of the semester. So let's just say 3 semesters.
Yeah.
And I have had 0 students complain. I have had multiple students feel some amount of anxiety. I've had students say, okay, well, Professor Ostro, you say that you're going to AI detect here. What does it look like if it's bad? Okay, well, no, let's have that conversation. Let's actually
Yeah.
go through, you know,
Let's look at one. Yeah.
yeah. And the other thing I always tell them is, one thing you'll see in that folder is I have an AI disclosure policy form, and it is
Yeah.
meant to be very light. It is one page. My goal is for it to be under 30 seconds to fill out. You check a few boxes, you copy paste a few links in, you attach it at the end of your paper, you're good. And what I tell
Yeah.
students is if you fill that out honestly, I will never, ever, ever honor code you. I will assume you are acting in good faith.
Yeah.
If it's honest. I will say there was one time I had a student explicitly lie on it, and I
Yeah.
did honor code that poor student, and that sucked. That was a really not fun time. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I want my students to feel safe playing with this stuff. But even then, I need some insight into how they're doing it so I can give them relevant feedback. Right.
Right.
And at this point, one of the things that's actually been really illuminating is all of my students are sending me these ChatGPT chats. And so a lot of my feedback has moved there, right? Where I'm like,
Yes.
okay, here's some feedback on your paper itself, but also I see this mistake here. You had
Yeah.
asked ChatGPT this way. It gave you this output. You didn't
Yeah.
actually critically analyze this one part enough. So let's talk about
Yeah.
in the future ways I can help you build that skill.
So you're
Right.
kind of doing AI literacy at the time, building
Yep.
their, yeah.
Yeah, actually, one of the things I did this summer, I was actually just talking with Laura Duman about this. I right now I'm teaching 2 back to back. I'm in the second one now. 5-week intensive upper level writing classes. So
Okay.
these are in the state of Colorado. Students have to write 50 pages for an upper level writing requirement, and I have 19 of those students in each classes. So I get to read 1,900 pages of student writing in 10 weeks this summer. But yeah, it's a lot. It's incredible. It's awful, right? And like on some level, AI detection is essential in that sort of setting because all I'm doing, I want to be very clear. I think the literature is abundantly clear at this point that AI detection is very, very good, specifically at spotting 100% unedited AI output
Yeah.
or 100% unedited human output.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, Pangram is the one that jumped out the most in Saha and Fazy for what it's worth.
Yeah.
I'm not paid by Pangram. I just think they did well in that study. But
Yeah.
they had a 0 false positive rate, 89% or something like that accuracy. That's good enough because there is no situation in my class where 100% AI output is correct.
Right.
Right? Like there is no assignment where that is an appropriate thing to do. And
Yeah.
so all I'm doing is using it essentially just to catch that. And anything past that, I'm just using it to corroborate what the students said on their AI disclosure form. Hey,
Yeah.
I used AI to kind of help with my research. And also, I am terrible at writing intros. So I gave it a thesis and told it to write me an intro for it. Great. And, I don't know if I love that, but that honesty at least is an inlet to me, maybe helping them be better at that or
Yeah. I
something.
was gonna say my hackles went up. It's like, what?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, no, no. But
Yeah.
that's the thing where at the very least, I'm meeting students where they are. They're letting me into what their workflow currently looks like. And I'm able to give relevant, helpful, I
Yeah.
think, feedback there. But a lot of that is all about messaging, right? Like I try to make it as clear as I can to my students that the last thing I want is to honor code them. Like
Yeah.
it is a huge waste of my time, of their time. It is not good for anyone. And
Yeah.
I would much rather a world where we have transparency and just this mutual trust and respect where they feel like they have a hand on the ball of the policy too.
So, okay. So I have maybe some ideas to reinforce what you're saying and also to challenge what you're saying.
Give me both.
So the reinforcement is the piece where you're having them disclose, and then you don't have to treat it as you call them honor code, honor coding them or honor code
Yep.
violation, dishonesty. You don't have to treat it as dishonesty
Nope.
because they're honest with you. And then you can treat it as a learning issue of, okay, yeah, you got it to write you the intro. However, let's look at our learning outcomes for this course. That actually is bypassing the learning, and therefore I
Yep.
want you to go back and write the intro yourself or whatever the recourse is, right?
It
Love
also lets me
that.
catch
It's like
it's
treating it like drafts.
Yeah, it lets me catch things before they escalate too, right?
Yes.
Like I recently had an assignment where students had to, in groups, they had to write 7 3-panel comics because
Mhm.
this was a class on comics as literature. They
Yeah.
had to draw 7 very simple comics and then write a short, as a group, 3 to 4 page reflection on why they made the choices they did in these comics.
Yep.
And one student, just because of health, he had missed his group. And so he was going to do it alone. So he and I emailed and negotiated, okay, you can do just 5 and your
Yeah.
paper can be 2 pages, but get me that. And he sent me his ChatGPT link as he was doing the assignment. And I noticed that he had asked ChatGPT to generate the comics. And so I just reached out and was like, hey, actually, this is not appropriate. I don't care how badly they're drawn. I want
Yeah.
your experience. Right.
Yeah.
Like I wanted, because these topics were all about like, what is it like being a student and, going
Mhm.
for lunch in the dorms, asking questions about their lived life right now.
Yeah.
And I just wanted that insight, and I was able to catch that early because of
Yeah.
this transparency
In
statement.
the
That
process.
that literally never escalated to an honor code thing because I emailed the
Yeah.
student. He was like, "Oh, hey, no worries. Yeah, I'll get on that. Thanks."
Yeah.
Done.
No, and that's so, in a lot of the conversations we've been having in podcasts and on social media is about privileging, trying to get into process more than product. And so I hadn't actually thought of that as having them share their URL when they start with ChatGPT rather than when they've finished allows you to get an insight into their process, just like looking at maybe version history of Google Docs, but interrupting instead of waiting till the end and then saying, oh, you did this wrong.
And that wasn't even my plan, to be
I
clear. That
know,
was
but
just
I
this was
like
just
that
convenient
idea.
and it worked. And
Yeah.
like in the future, I might be asking students to do that a little more because it is really helpful. And,
Yeah.
and also, I have another thing that some students have done is that I have one student right now who is using the same ChatGPT chat for the entire course. So I can scroll all the way to the beginning
Yeah.
and see how his learning has evolved this entire
Oh,
time.
interesting.
And it actually is really useful because
Huh.
I can see that he is asking more in-depth questions because this is a class about scientific writing and
Yeah.
rhetoric around it. And he is deep diving now, asking questions like, okay, wait, so this article I just read, how is this article itself an example of this concept we learned last week? And
Yeah.
I'm like, that's great, right? That is
Yeah.
not circumventing learning. That is engaging it,
Yeah, that's
and I love that I can see that. And with the best cases, having a student's chat log legitimately assuages my fear that they are
yeah.
avoiding learning, right? But there are also other cases where I see that. I see some students, the most horrifying question I see a lot in chat logs is, what should I think about this?
Yes.
That is something I see, I'd say not super common, but I'd say like 1 out of 5 chat logs. And it is something I'm actively trying to push my students away
Yeah.
from. Like, if you're a little alienated from your ability to write, I can help you with that. But if you can't look at this comic and say you do or don't like it, I don't know how to help you with that, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, and so I mean this also gets into I think the really extreme folks on the surveillance, anti-surveillance side of things would say you looking into their chat history is surveillance. And I'm not I don't think that framing is helpful. As I've said to people, look, the definition of surveillance is close observation and then comma, usually of criminal activity, right? But if
sure.
you take away that last phrase, if which is about why you're doing the close observation, you take that why away and you replace it with a different why, you can maintain good relationships with your students while closely observing them doing their work. And isn't that what apprenticeships were? Like this is if we were back to smaller, I mean, you already have small classes, but large amount of writing they have to do. But if we were back to more manageable student to teacher ratio, then we would be watching a student do the chemistry lab. We wouldn't be having them write a report about doing the chemistry lab, right?
And the fact is, we still do that in a lot of other places in education too, right?
Yeah.
When I taught high school Latin, it was at a private school, so I wasn't licensed. So part of getting approved was I literally my first month teaching, I
Go
had
and
someone who
observe.
was in the classroom basically like every other day.
Hmm.
And it was surveillance, but also in no point did it in any way chafe me because I understood, like, yeah, I do need to show that I'm
They're
good at
there to
this.
help.
That well, and also I need to show them I know what I'm doing.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it is irresponsible of this school to put me in this class with children if
Without
they don't know that
observing.
I'm good at this. I would not want to work at a school that does not do that.
Yeah,
And in the same way, I feel like I feel like that is a message you can communicate to your students pretty well,
so easily.
right?
Yeah,
Like, hey, my job here is to show that you can pass a certain bar of knowledge on this. We can debate the bar, we can debate why the bar is set up the way it is. The whole
yeah,
history of the bar is actually a nightmare. But
yeah,
like, that is my job here. And I want to be as friendly with you as I can and supportive and help you pass that bar. But
yeah.
also that bar does exist, like whether or not. And I think what frustrates me when I talk to people who are super anti-AI detection at this point is I don't really know. their alternatives often fall into one of two camps. It's either this, well, you can design, you can assessment design out
Right.
this, which I don't think is true. Like I think there are quite a few studies of
Can
this.
create friction, but
What was it Casali or something? There was some study in England with like an online business school recently where they did this. I could
mm,
send you the link later, but
yeah.
they did this where they redesigned a bunch of assessments where students had been cheating. They put a few semesters into it, then put them out again. It was an asynchronous format.
Uh,
Did the entire thing and got literally the exact same percentage of cheating,
yeah.
despite totally modifying and modernizing and making authentic all the assessments.
Yeah.
And but then also beyond that, the other thing I hear all the time is people saying, like, I can tell. And it's like, no, you can't. Like, there's a certain hubris. At the end of the day, my use of AI detection is I'd like to think because I have a certain humility that I can't see this stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Uh,
one of my good friends, James Faulkner, is a technologist at Endicott, and he is super clever. And he was in the process of trying to see if he could intentionally trick AI detector into flagging him. So he like spent hours and tons of time writing in the most AI ways
yeah.
possible. And he never quite got there. But what he accidentally did was made a very good is it AI or is it human quiz. And when I took it, I got a 38%.
Yeah. I've
Right.
never done well in those either.
Yeah. And I don't want, even if AI detection is some amount of error prone, like let's look at those Saha and Facey numbers and say that there's a 12% of the time it lets someone who used AI too much get away with it.
Yeah.
That is still so much more accurate than my eyes.
Right.
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 And I don't know. To me, AI detection has a place just the very beginning of the process where I'm just corroborating. You gave me this form. Does this form match what this thing says? It does. And then I don't use it again until
Just a
the
point
next
of
assignment.
data.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just
Just a point of data.
one of 5 or 6 data points that I look
Yeah.
at.
Well, so and to the challenge thing, because I
Hmm.
promised you a
Please.
reinforcement and a challenge. You talked about honor coding someone. It's the worst experience. It doesn't benefit anybody. I want to give you a chance to maybe expand on that a bit,
Yeah,
or because I would say that learning from messing up is actually a good life experience, and it depends on how the institution leverages that. Right. So
for
here
sure.
we have a lot of after education for students to help them like bake based on Kolb's experiential learning cycle, right? Like putting in opportunities for reflection and abstract conceptualization and active experimentation. And I really believe that faculty reporting students for their ethical mistakes is just as important for helping them learn as dealing with their honest mistakes, like in the
Yeah,
classroom with content knowledge. So I was a little bit, my hackles got a little bit out when you said it's the worst experience and no one
100%.
wants this and it's not good for anybody.
Well, I still might stand by the first two statements, right?
Okay.
The worst experience might be a bit superlative. Maybe it's not the worst, but it's a suboptimal experience, we'll say.
Okay.
And then you are correct though. It definitely learning from your mistakes is like probably the single most important human thing. And you
Yeah.
are right. I definitely was throwing the baby out with the bathwater on that. I didn't mean to. This specific instance though was pretty bleak because
Okay.
like I have in the last, just to even put numbers to it, right? Since Gen AI popped into my life,
Yeah.
I have honor coded.
Uninvited.
Yeah, uninvited. It just showed up at the party.
Yeah. Showed up at my
Uh,
house, barged in.
it's just in my classroom all the time now.
Yeah.
But it's in that time, I believe I've honor coded somewhere between 15 and 20 students.
Okay.
And the vast majority of those, it has been a relatively small thing. Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, what I mean is it is, at CU, the initial policies, if you get caught, and you get honor coded and they find you more likely than not guilty, the first thing is a training. You have to go to
Okay.
it. And I do like that they make it a little inconvenient. It's on a Saturday.
Yeah.
It's like ruins your day a little bit, but it's like a few, and then you have to write a paper about what you've learned. But
Yeah.
I do think it is a good level setting, like ethical level setting
Yeah.
exercise. And for the vast majority of students, that's where they ended up. This
Yeah.
specific student who I was saying it was really bad, it was because he was graduating and
Yeah.
failing this paper failed him in the course, and it definitely held him back from graduating.
Yeah.
And that's what's suboptimal. Like I feel like on some very human level, I felt like that was a pretty big consequence for a pretty dumb young man mistake. But I
Yeah.
also, I want to be, I don't want to go too in detail on this, right? But like I had reached out to the student, we had discussed,
Yeah.
we had made very clear where the lines were on this second
Yeah.
attempt. He got caught on the second rewrite of this paper and
Yeah.
still was doing the same thing and
Yeah.
hoping I wouldn't notice. And I think that's where eventually there's like, sorry, but you do have to have consequences because you will literally never learn from this if you don't.
Yeah.
My concern in that moment was if I don't honor code this student, what does that tell him in the future about what he can and
Right.
can't get away with?
Yeah.
Right. So
I
that's why I
appreciate
was
the
saying,
new.
yeah, that one specifically hurt me to do because I also I don't know. I make a point. I've never honor coded a student without meeting with them a number of times ahead of time.
Yeah.
And so it also makes it a little more, when
Personal.
students make these mistakes, I think it's really unhelpful for faculty to personalize it. When a student doesn't, set aside enough time because they went to a party and they didn't do their draft on time and they use ChatGPT instead, that is nothing to do with me. That is
Yeah.
entirely them just being young adults
Right.
and making decisions I probably might have made when I was 19.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know and I should make space to have grace for that. I think that's really
Yeah.
important. But this one was particularly frustrating because it's like, I've given you grace like 3 times here, man.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
anyway. Yeah.
No, I spend a lot of time helping faculty, yeah, deal with the emotional response to both the intellectual labor, the physical labor that sometimes dealing with violations takes. And for me, it's about keeping the educator hat on, seeing the student as someone who couldn't learn the lesson we were trying to teach through other methods. And yes, this one takes a bit longer, but if we really care about, say, humans and humans being educated, and what I've been arguing for is a move towards competency-based education, some students are going to learn it in 2 hours and some are going to learn it
Yep.
after very much a lot of pain. And so what I think the problem is we don't give faculty time, training, and support to do any of that.
Well, and I also, yeah, I couldn't agree more on
I
that.
mean, we give them some support, but not enough time or training.
Well, and it's also, to me, at least it depends on the institution, I'm sure, but at least in my experience, a lot of that training comes after you've expressed a ton of interest. You have to go
Sure,
looking for the training very often rather than
sure.
it just being there.
But
But
you
I
still have
also,
to make the time for it, right?
yep, and often unpaid time.
Yes.
Well, and that's the other thing I think about a lot with this stuff too, is like when I talked before about having a certain amount of understanding of my authority in the classroom, right? I'm using, this is coming from my like Latin background, the autoritas that I
Yeah.
carry, but like that actually I think informs the way I carry out these proceedings as well. The
Mm,
reason I pull AI detection in the classroom is because I am fairly confident in my pedagogical approach and that like I have an idea of how I'm scaffolding my learning and I need something that covers that gap. If there's a
yeah.
better thing that does that, that's fine. But ultimately, this is why I often worry about people who, or not people, but when I worry about a lot of these talking points here that are like so flattening the classroom, is
Yeah.
I also think that for newer teachers, it makes them less confident in the authority they're supposed to have in that classroom. Like I should, if I'm carrying it out whimsically, that's bad. But ultimately, I am
Yes.
there because the university has entrusted that I have a idea of fairness and how to teach this, that I have an understanding of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I want to verbalize that to students. I want to make that clear. And I think, that is part of why it's also important that I actually have a mechanism that helps me deal with those things.
Yeah. No, I love that. Own our authority, but own it in a way that is authentic and that is clear how you're using it, and that you're using it in a way that upholds our values of integrity and fairness and equity. And it's we can do that. We're smart people.
Yeah.
And I
We've also done it for thousands of
and
years.
we've and the problem is all of us have had a teacher who did it badly, right? Who
Yep.
abused their authority. And I think that, my my late father would always say, "Why do you always remember the bad things?" And I said, "Because that's human nature, right? Like, I remember the good things too, but the bad things stick with us. So we remember that one teacher who
Yep.
abused their authority, and then we swear we're never going to do that." And it's kind of like when I say to faculty, don't tell students grades are important. That's a lie. Aren't important. That's a lie, right?
Yep.
Grades are currency. And so I'll just say to students, like, yes, I have authority, and yes, grades are currency. And let's put that into context, and explain that again, the why behind all of that.
Grades aren't important to us because we're at a point in our lives where grades don't matter.
Yeah.
Right. No one is going to come into my work tomorrow.
As to
My
see
boss,
transcript.
yeah, my boss Tomash is not going to come in and be like, hey, you had a B+ on that most recent talk, just so you know. Right. Like that's not going to
Well, I
happen.
do get graded annually in my performance
Oh,
appraisal, but
but at least it's not a grade, I get. But yeah, I
well,
get
it
your
is.
point.
It's B, A.
Oh, ours is
Oh
just a
yeah.
number. Oh, I
Yeah.
never mind. I guess grades still matter there. But yeah, like it's one of those things where the whole idea of saying grades don't matter is because we're in a privileged position where they actually generally don't.
Yeah.
It feels a lot like telling a poor person like money can't buy
Money does.
happiness, right? It is
Right.
that, but academically,
Yeah.
and that's a bummer, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, like I want my students, when I used to teach Latin, I said this all the time that I'm just teaching this class because I'm the person in this room who knows the most Latin, right? Like I'm here because I'm the one who just happens to. If one of you knew more, you'd be welcome to teach.
Yeah.
And to some degree, I think you can still run classes with that sort of democratic view,
Oh,
right? I
sure.
I used to teach a class on heroism in literature, and in that class, We did 3 units, one on classics, one on comics, one on war films. You can tell how I made a class out of things I like.
Mm-hmm.
And in that class, in the last unit, we were comparing World War II cinema to a lot of more like Desert Storm informed cinema and looking at the archetypes of heroes, right? Audie Murphy versus Chris Kyle, and
Mm-hmm.
how do each of these espouse different values of their era. And I had a student in my class who had met Chris Kyle, right?
Okay.
Like he had known
Yeah.
him. And so, like, not in a super close way, but like he had had a few times where he worked with him.
Conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I absolutely would be a terrible teacher if I was like, well, I need to hold on to authority. I know more here. It's like,
Yeah.
no, that guy knows more. Let him
Yeah.
talk. It might
Yeah.
invite a little chaos into the classroom. Chris Kyle's, a complicated guy. Maybe some awful anecdotes about to come out, but ultimately, I would rather invite that chaos into my classroom and make it a little more of an authentic moment and memorable for my students
Yeah.
than to assert my own grip and quash out
Yeah.
that knowledge.
Yeah. Well, let's end there because I think that's a beautiful point to end as we live in the age of AI and we're trying to figure out how to center our humanity. Part of it is centering human chaos, human experience, inviting everybody into the conversation, and yet also remembering our roles. And we do have roles in every situation, and remembering our roles and knowing when they need to be upheld and knowing when they need to be challenged. So with
I
that,
love that.
Chris, I appreciate you coming on the podcast, and we will definitely share links with everybody of the things we talked about, and really appreciate you coming in.
Hey, I love it. Thank you so much for having me, Tricia.